Grand Rising Soul Family. Adam Jackson here with another episode of the Sacred Sons podcast. We are bringing in a powerful guest today. He's been with us once before. His name is Connor Beaton, and this time he is armed with a new book titled Men's Work. One of the things I love about Connor, he plays it straight down the middle. His information is tight, and he keeps... Dude, I'm telling you what, like in this game of men's work, in this life path of healing work, to have a voice in the community who's bringing it through with consistency and who's bringing it for men in this modern time. So excited to drop in with Connor on all things men's work and Sacred Sons. We have an international EMX experience happening December 1st through 4th. I will be leading EMX San Diego. EMX is our initiatory event. It's the embodied masculine experience. 40 men in the desert, going deep into connection, confrontation, and celebration. Same time, same weekend, South Carolina. EMX Southeast led by Kareem Manuel and Kevin Walton. And then all the way across the pond, December 1st through 4th, we have the EMX Devon, UK, led by Jason McKenzie, Kale Kaale Kahi, and Andrew Huvar. You do not want to miss one of these experiences. Get to the one closest to you and join this movement. It's time, men. Connect. Get in person. This is the way. This is the work. And with that, our guest today. He's a writer and speaker. He is the host of the ManTalks podcast, and he is the author of the new book, Men's Work. Please welcome Connor Beaton.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. That's one hell of an intro. It's one hell of an intro, and I just want to say I really appreciate the work that you men are doing, and just the spaces that you're creating, the conversations that you're creating, the work that you're creating. I think it's deeply powerful, and one of the things I love about men's work is that there's so many different versions, all pointing towards the same thing, all speaking a similar language, but using different words and sometimes different, coming from different experiences. And I think it's so potent. I remember one of the men in one of our groups asked me, like, do you ever feel like you're in competition with like these organizations that are out there like Sacred Sons and Everyman? And I'm like, fuck no. Like, I am deeply, deeply grateful because you and the other organizations are going to speak to men that I might not reach. And that for me is all that matters. Yes. So I honor you and just thank you for the work that you're doing.
Appreciate that. We say in Sacred Sons, this work is for all men. And the reality of it is not everyone's going to listen to me. Not everyone's going to listen to you. But the men will find their way to this movement. And we also say there are no teams in men's work. There is one team, and that is the evolution of masculine consciousness on this planet. That's the team we're on. And we're all rooting for it. So whatever the pathway has been for you to be a part of this conversation, thank you. And thank you for being here and listening. And so with that, I just spoke to Dr. Martin Shaw, who is a popular figure in the mythopoetic men's movement. And so what I wanted to ask you is, we stand on the shoulders of giants as well. There were men who came before us also teaching this and training men. And like I said in the intro, we are bringing this for the modern man. You can read Iron John, you can read King, Warrior, Magician, Lover. Why did you want to bring this book through now, Men's Work?
Yeah, well, I agree. I mean, I've had some really powerful mentors in my life, some of them versed in the lineage of Carl Jung and the shadow and archetypes, some of them versed in, more sort of modern psychotherapeutic modalities, Gestalt therapy, etc. And I wanted to write a book that really cut to the core of what is it that we as men need to do in order to address this sort of lingering question that I think that all of us feel within us, which is that many of us, all of us as men, have been born with a charge inside of us that we haven't been taught how to carry, how to deal with, how to work with, and how to direct. And we have many different forms of that charge. But I think for most of us, what that charge looks like is our pain. And so the first line of the book is a man's work begins in pain. And for me, that's truth as far as I can see it. That until we as men know how to effectively deal with where we have been abused, where we have abused others, where we have been hurt, where we have hurt others, until we know what to do with that content within us, psychologically, emotionally, and physically or sexually, we will not be as potent as we ultimately know and want to be in the world. And so I felt like this book was prime because, I started ManTalks in 2015, and the men's movement had sort of like come and gone with the mythopoetic movement, with the Robert Blys and the Martin Shaws and, and the Dr. Glovers and the David Dedas, and it had kind of like come and then gone and then come and then gone. And when I started ManTalks in 2015, I could see that all of a sudden there was this surge that was going to start to happen, and that men were emerging back into the collective consciousness and into the collective conversation to try and sort out and sift through the sort of baggage, I think we could say, or the masculine hand-me-downs that they had been given from the generations before them. And I was a little hesitant of calling the book men's work because that's it's a genre and there's many different men that are out there doing that. But I wanted to create something that was accessible. And I say right in the very beginning of the book, like there's many forms of men's work, and I don't pretend to own that or anything like that. This is just a sort of recanting of the work that I had to do as a man in order to step into a more mature version of myself in a way that I could live my purpose and contribute to the world and love my partner and raise my children and do something meaningful with my life. And it's also the stories of the men that I've worked with. And so that's what really propelled me to write the book, was I wanted to give guys a very clear, direct, practical, and tactical book where I could say, okay, you're sabotaging your relationship. You're sabotaging your life. You don't have a sense of purpose. Here's what you can do. Here are the steps that you can take. Here's a deeper understanding of what's going on within you. And to give it to them in a way where they can actually do something about it and integrate it and implement things that are in the book. So, yeah.
Yeah. I love it. We as men, we need practical tools. Sometimes, we're in a time of information overload. However, this is quality information to have. And what you're calling men's work, Sacred Sons calls masculine alchemy. It's a little different twist on it. So yes, you have your flavor. We have our flavor. The many various groups out there in circles, they have their flavors. Some of them liken themselves to samurais, for God's sakes, There's all kinds of flavors. But the point is, it starts with the pain. In Rumi's quote, the wound is where the light enters. So last time we got into a bit of your story, and we don't have to go back into it, but I know you're speaking from experience. And so could you just talk a little bit about maybe your own core wounding? And I really see this book as an invitation and an offering of mentorship for men who are going through similar things that you've been through.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. And I really was a man who was high functioning and successful, but was also high suffering and high struggling. And so I think, that resonates with a lot of the guys that I've worked with. And so for me, I was in a period in my life where from the outside, things looked fantastic, traveling the world, great career, great girlfriend, the motorcycle, the Mustang, like sort of living what I thought a young man should be doing. And behind the scenes, I was really struggling. I was depressed. I was womanizing. I was cheating. And I had been unfaithful in every relationship that I was in. I was abusing substances and alcohol, drugs. And I just felt unruly and out of control. And nobody saw that part. And so, over the years, I've done a lot of digging. And, I grew up in a split family. So I actually grew up between two family systems that were identical in some ways, that both had, two parents and then two kids, and then I was sort of in the middle, and I bounced back and forth.
Oh, wow.
And, I think one of my core woundings was that I experienced a good amount of verbal, emotional abuse as a child. I was told things like, you're stupid, you're a piece of shit, you're not good enough, you're not going to amount to anything, what the fuck is wrong with you? And I heard that quite constantly from one of my primary caretakers. And so I had this sort of wounding on top of wounding, because when I was a very young boy, I actually, and I'm not going to get necessarily into the details of it, just for the sake of a little bit of privacy, but I actually witnessed the uh, the falling apart of my parents' marriage. And so I was there in the moment where the divorce happened, where the actual ending happened. And I was a young boy, and it was one of my first primary memories. And so I witnessed the death of my family system.
Yeah, just in that moment, what did that do to you in that moment when you go back into that memory? Is it just like a soul crushing, reality shifting moment for you as a young
Completely.
child?
Yeah. I mean, it was, what I started to realize when I started to work on that was that was one of my first memories as a human being, was the collapse of the family system.
Yeah.
And it left what most of us would call a hole, a weight, a darkness, a void, an emptiness that I just didn't know how to deal with. And as a boy, I remember, countless nights where I was with my mom and my stepfather, because I lived with them, and you sort of crying myself to sleep and not understanding why I couldn't see my father. And I only got to see him once a month. And so it left this very real hole in me, this pain, this heaviness, and this darkness. I was just like, I don't know how to deal with this shit. I'm 7. And so fast forward
Right.
to being a young man who is drinking excessively and, driving his motorcycle on the highway at 310 kilometers an hour with, a bit of a death wish, not fully comprehending and understanding what was going on, but feeling and carrying that pain that I had experienced as a young boy, and not correlating the destructive behavior that I was acting out to the pain that I had suffered as a child. And I think that's the case for many men, is that we don't want to look at our pasts and the pain that we experience, that we haven't learned how to be with, that we haven't learned how to heal, accept, love, integrate, and that no one else has helped us make sense of. And I think historically, that's what elders used to do for us as men. They would tell stories, they would paint pictures, and spin tales of myths that would help us make some sense of the sort of cruelty of life, really, and the cruelty that can sometimes happen intentionally or unintentionally in our lives. And so, yeah, so that was a part of what I wanted to bake into this book, was to help give some understanding of, most men are carrying some form of a pain or an intensity within them that no one has really helped them make sense of. And that can be debilitating and isolating and crippling.
Let's call it
Yeah.
all men.
Yeah, that's fair.
Let's just say
That's
all
fair.
men. In both of our experience, I believe, like any man we encounter, and once you're in this work, it changes the perception of how you walk down the street when you look a man in the eyes. It changes because you know that every man deep down inside is carrying a piece like this, a wound like this. And so I'm getting the sense like it's almost like you're writing this book for a younger version of yourself, potentially. And so what I want to ask you from your experience, I understand the problem. And the problem has been stated in many ways: suicide rates, abuse, physical, self-harm, the materialism, the womanizing. Like, the problems have been stated. Is men's work a solution to this problem?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Or to these problems?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so what's the leap? So imagine there's a guy. He's misaligned. He's cheating. He's in and out. He's escaping. He's avoiding. And he goes, well, what the fuck do these guys know? You know what I'm saying? Like, how are these guys going to crack my reality? How do we make that leap?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's many ways to do it, and I think it's very man dependent. But I think one of the biggest things is understanding that most men have no real grasp on why they sabotage. And the misconception of why we as men are sabotaging in our life is that we are wanting to be out of control. But in my experience, when we sabotage as men and as women, but we're talking about men specifically, when we sabotage as men, it's because we are trying to cling to some semblance of control, that we don't feel powerful, that we feel overwhelmed by something in our life. We feel powerless most places in our life, and we feel that out of controlness. And so we use sabotage as a mechanism to feel in control. You know, if you think about, for the men that are listening to this, you think about when you sabotage and you watch porn or you drink or you smoke weed or whatever the fuck it is that you do to sabotage in your life, I almost guarantee you that is the most in control that you feel when you open the web browser to watch porn. You know exactly what you're going to watch. When you light a joint, you know exactly how you're going to feel. When you text the girl that you know you shouldn't be texting, or go and meet up with the woman that you know you shouldn't be meeting up with, you know how it's going to go. You know how you're going to feel before, you know how you're going to feel during, you know how you're going to feel after. So there's a sense of control in our sabotage, and it's an illusion of power. It's us trying to connect to a deeper form of feeling powerful in our lives, but missing the mark. And so I think for a lot of guys that are listening, it's like, listen, you know, we as men, we want to feel empowered, we want to feel powerful, and we want to feel like we have some semblance of sovereignty over our actions, our choices, and our decisions. And what I would just say is that your pain is the very thing working against you. Your weaknesses and your insecurities are the very things that get in the way and sort of wreck your best intentions, right? Your goals, your aims, your desires, your dreams, your vision. And so until you're willing to face that proverbial dragon that's within you, of your pain, of your weakness, of your insecurities, you will not be, period, full stop, as capable, as powerful, as potent as you know you are capable of being. And so it is the work.
Yeah.
You know, it is the work.
I think an important piece that you illuminate here as well is a lot of men are isolated in their suffering. Like in your case, were you like, oh my God, I'm the only one out here doing this. I look great on the outside. Here I am doing all this behavior that I feel is misaligned. I know when I was going through separation, I was like, holy shit, is this what dads are going through out here? Oh my God. You know what I'm saying? And it's like, no, It's just me and everybody out there. Everybody else out there is fucking full house and they're like jamming and it's all good. And I'm just here in my own shit. And so there's this acknowledgement piece, like, and you know, that even comes from the elders as well, not only in the form of mythology, but in the form of their own life experience, that like, hey man, you're not alone in this. I think this is a great starting point for men to just go, oh, you have it too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's two things that I talk about in the book that I think tie into this. Number one is that there's a false notion in modern masculine culture that says that you as a man you as a man are stronger for your ability to suppress the things that you don't like about yourself. And that's a false dichotomy, right? So we as men buy into this idea, well, like my insecurities, I feel insecure on a woman, or I feel insecure about my body, or about my dick, or about my sexual capacity, or I feel these insecurities, I feel these weaknesses, I feel this not worthy enough. And there's this false notion that if you can just hide that shit, that you will be stronger because of it, and it cripples a man. And then secondly, we've also been taught to isolate and sequester those parts of ourselves away from the people who love us. And so, as I talk about in the book, isolation makes a man impotent. And so the more that you isolate these parts of yourself that you dislike, the more that you essentially castrate and diminish your own power and your own potency. Because what you're saying to yourself is, there are parts of me that I do not know how to handle, that I'm afraid of, that I fear, and so I need to hide them from the world. And you walk around interacting with people from that place. I'm afraid of myself. I'm scared of myself. I'm scared of my actions. I'm scared of how I operate. I'm scared that I don't make the right choices. And that's how you interact with people, trying to present this sort of very brave, very grounded, very centered, very congruent version of yourself. But it's false. Even if other people buy into the facade, right? Even if other people buy into the mask that you're presenting to the world, you still fucking know it's false. And that's the problem. And so
Right.
we have to be able to bring some of these pieces back into a communal environment. So things like grief, things like shame, things like sadness, your anger, those things need to be witnessed by the community, because wholeness and a sense of individuality is only done in relationship. So the willingness that you have to be able to say, hey, I was abused as a kid, or I'm insecure about this thing in my relationship, or I feel weak, or I feel vulnerable when these things happen in my relationship or in my work, or I don't really feel like I have a sense of purpose in my life, and that fucking sucks. Your willingness to bring those things to another man sends a signal into your body, into your experience, into your brain that says, I am brave enough and courageous enough to share the parts of myself that I'm afraid of. And that is meaningful, because then you can get feedback. Other people can challenge you on those parts. They can hold you accountable. But also, and I think this is the maybe important piece, things like grief need to be witnessed in order for them to move through us.
Yes.
You cannot, and you can try your whole life. And I promise you, I tried for a very, very long time to carry my sadness, to carry my grief, to carry the pain of the abuse that I experienced by myself. And it didn't leave me, it didn't diminish, right? And I still carry it, in some ways, but it didn't diminish until I started to let other men into the game. And when I started to do that, not only did I feel more human, more whole, more complete, but I actually felt more loved, and I actually felt more powerful, because other men knew a fuller, more robust, more true version of who I am as a man. And that's what trust is, right? Is the revealing of who we actually are. So, yeah, I'll just pause there. I just said a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. That's no, it's great. I want to stay on this point that we can't do this work alone. And one of my teachers, Michael Gay, expressed it from one of his teachers, Dewey. Just so everyone has a sense of understanding why you can't do it alone. We are formed in relationship. We come into this life because of the joining of two, because of relationship. We're formed in relationship. We are wounded in relationship. And in your story, it's like you were wounded from the source of your life, from this relationship. And so how can we expect to heal on our own? If we're formed and wounded in relationship, we also must heal in relationship. And I want to be clear, it's not that we go to the person who hurt us and blather all the ways that they hurt us at them. We can heal in relationship with others, just having the awareness and building that trust that you're speaking to in order to move the energy that is stuck in our bodies from those experiences. And so I do know there's a lot of men just constantly taking in podcasts, taking in information, taking Adderall, smoking joints, doing the things. And you're right. That's a dead end type of path. But what I wanted to ask you, and I have my own reasons for this, why men? Why can't men go heal with women? And I know a lot of brothers, especially in the spiritual community, they love to go sit in ceremonies with women and be around the feminine and put on the show, really. And not be in their shadow, not be in their shit, and come as that grounded person to heal around. So why is it important that men heal with other men?
Yeah, well, I think the answer to that is multifaceted. I think on one level, it's safer to go and do so with women. There's a comfort and a safety that the masculine and that men will often feel with other women. That's just naturally present. Even if you've been wounded by women or betrayed by them or hurt by them, there's just a different quality of ease that isn't as present for most men when they get around men, because there is an element of confrontation that is so imperative when you are around another man. This notion of you're going to confront me for my shit. And you're going to confront me with your story. And you're going to confront me with how similar your life may have been, or how similar your pain is, or how similar your experience is. And it's that type of confrontation that we both ultimately need and aren't going to find in the stories of most women, of almost any woman. You know, what a woman will have gone through is a very different experience, psychologically, emotionally, physically, etc. And so for us as men, when we get around other men, we see ourselves in those men. We see our stories and our pain and our disconnect in those other men. And there's a confrontation and a challenge that's baked within that dynamic that we both really, really need, and for most of us are really afraid of, you know. And I think that that's a huge part of it. There's other pieces, but I think that that's arguably one of the most important ones. And then maybe lastly, I'll just say one more thing, which is most of our wounding comes back to a man or a male archetype, right? Even if you were abused by your mom, it's like, well, where was your dad to protect you, right? Where was the father? Where was the masculine figure? And so I think a lot of men are carrying around deep psychological or emotional wounds that have been given directly or indirectly from other men. And so part of the healing is to get around other men and to realize and recognize that it is safe, because most men feel more safe with women than they do with men. And that's a problem, right? That's a problem that you need to start to look at and bring into these spaces, because if you can heal with men, you can heal that wounding, your own masculine essence won't feel as confronting. It won't feel as overpowering and something that you have to fear. It will be something that you can step into and live from and embody in a much more easy fashion, you know, because you will have reconciled with the masculine as a collective on some level, but then the masculine on an individual level within your own psyche.
Beautiful. Beautiful answer. You know, men are afraid to step into men's work. I find like there's a lot of trepidation when men come into Sacred Sons circles. You can spot them. They're already teary-eyed, they're shaking, they're anxious, and that's cool. That's great. And it's because we're fucking sharpening each other. We're training each other. And just like when we go into the gym, training, sometimes it hurts. You know, sometimes it's hard to be held accountable. And certainly it's hard to be honest in a world built on lies, effectively. It's hard to be honest when you don't feel safe, right? But what happens is once you cross the threshold, once you're welcome, once you're embraced, once you are in the ceremony of it, it's one of the most natural things to us as men to gather, to share our stories, to share our pain, to share our grief. And again, in men's work, we don't get to the other side by sharing our victories. It never happens like that. It's always from sharing the depth of our heartbreak. That is like, again, that's the pain. That's the source. That's the portal on the path of healing. And so I want to stay right here, and I want to go back to the control, because I feel like this is something a lot of men deal with. I deal with it. It still comes up for me. I would imagine even after you've written this book, there's still parts of yourself that have a controller, that have an inner critic or whoever that is for you that comes online. And so what we're teaching is how to command our energy. And so the reality is, and hopefully I can say this in a way that alleviates pressure from men, is that you're actually not in control. You're rarely in control of what is going to happen. However, we can always be in command of our energy. And so this what I have experienced in men's work, it has gotten me so much further away from reactivity and into response and into responsibility, the ability to respond to whatever is coming at us. So in your frameworks, how do we learn to command our energy instead of seeking for that control?
Yeah, really, really good. So I think I'm going to talk a little bit about charge and intensity, or our direct felt experience. And I'm also going to talk about our relationship to powerlessness.
Yeah.
So, you and I have been talking a little bit about fear in the background of this conversation. And I think I just want to invite it into the forefront,
Yes.
which is every man has a very, very, very specific relationship with fear. And we as men have been sometimes taught, and in some ways taught, to not show when and where we are afraid. And so a lot of men are very unconscious of what they're actually afraid of. Secondly, which is important, because if you don't know what you're afraid of, you have no hope in hell of being able to direct your energy, because you are probably afraid of certain parts of your energy, the energy of anger, the energy of anxiety, the energy of your sexual arousal. All of those things you might be very afraid of and not even know it, and so you steer clear of it, but it's the thing that you ultimately need to connect to in your life. The second thing I want to say is, processes of initiation historically, and I write a little bit about this in the book, but processes of initiation historically they're meant to do many, many things, but one of them is to bring us as men into right relationship with power and powerlessness. So if you look at the structure of any initiation throughout history, it puts a man or a young boy into an experience of powerlessness where he cannot conquer, he cannot overcome, and in some ways he is overpowered. And so he has this safe sort of spiritual experience of what it feels like to be put into a powerless position, but not in an abusive way, in a way that he gets initiated into something bigger than he ultimately was. And what most men have experienced in our culture is a lack of healthy initiation, but an experience of powerlessness in an abusive way, right? That's what I experienced. I experienced having somebody, be larger, be more powerful, put me in a powerless position, be aggressive with their words and their energy and their actions and physically with their body. And so for most of us, we don't like feeling powerless as men. I've never met a man that's like, oh, I love feeling powerless. Yeah. It's my jam. Maybe it gets sexualized to some degree, but for the most part, men want to feel powerful. And when we aren't aware of where we feel powerless, and I'm going to give you an example of this. Many men that I've worked with or encountered over the years, the nice guy archetype, find themselves in relationships with women that they describe as being dominant, overbearing, very angry, sort of aggressive, very direct, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
In their masculine. She's really in her masculine. She's like an alpha. She's an alpha boss babe.
Right. Yes. Thank you. Yeah. Exactly. I appreciate that. And so what's that man really saying? I feel powerless a lot of the times around my woman. I feel powerless. And so the response to that powerlessness is to try and control. And I love Dewey's, you talked about Dewey before. I love Dewey's frame on this, which is that control is where there's a lack of trust, and power is where trust resides. And so for most of us, when we don't trust ourselves, we move to control. We try and control things. We try and get other people to act a certain way or respond a certain way or whatever it might be. And when we don't trust in our relationship, we do the same thing. We try and control the other person, right? You can't say that, you can't do this. I hate when you do that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so we have to start to be willing to look at the truth of where we feel powerless as men and be able to step into a more robust and courageous way of being that says, I'm going to admit when I feel powerless, because then I can begin to work with it, right? Carl Jung said that the first step in the therapeutic process of any therapeutic process is confession. And for me, I would code that as the first step in our development as men, in our growth, is consciousness and awareness, is bringing awareness into some of these things. So bringing awareness to, when are you trying to control? When do you feel powerless in your relationship? And what might trust look like instead of not trusting yourself, instead of not trusting your anger, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So those are the main pieces. And then the more sort of direct piece is to live from the body instead of the brain. And Einstein had a great quote
Yeah.
where he said, the rational mind is a faithful servant and the intuitive mind is a sacred gift. And we've created a culture that has forgotten that has honored the servant and forgotten the gift, right? That we've pedestaled the rational mind as men, and we try and use it to solve all of our problems, and it doesn't work. You know, it doesn't work. And so we have to start to tune into our body and start to learn how to direct our energy. So how do we do that? I use the frame of charge and intensity. So charge is the direct felt experience that you have in your body. Every man has a charge, and every emotion, which is just energy in motion,
Yes.
has its own unique charge. So for example, when I feel the charge of anger in my body, I feel it start to brew in the lower parts of my belly. And then I kind of feel like, if you've ever watched Iron Man, he's got that chest piece that lights up, right? I feel that anger. As my anger starts to rise, I feel that in my chest, just like, you know, like this nuclear power plant comes online, and that energy starts to grow and build and grow and build and move up and up and up and up. And then if it reaches into my head, then I'm screwed because it takes over my thoughts. So we have to learn how to work with the different charges of our emotional energies. We have to be very familiar with them and start to describe them, and to move out of thinking about what's happening in our body and move into experiencing what's happening in our body. What does that anger feel like? What does it look like? You know, if it could speak, what would it sound like? What's the quality and the texture and the flavor to it?
What is this anger trying
Yeah.
to teach me? What is it
Yeah,
trying to
100%.
teach me? What is it revealing about me in this moment? What aspect of myself is unhealed that this anger is revealing to me in this moment? Now, it's hard to get in that mode when it's full on Iron Man and it's already got you. And you said you said it gets to your thoughts and then it's over, because once it gets to your thoughts, then it comes out in the words and then it comes out in the actions.
Yeah.
Very
Can I say
quickly,
something on that?
mind you. And so there's this
Yeah.
yeah, but I just want to finish this and say there's a moment of mindful conscious awareness that you mentioned that has to be a part of our process or our ritual around, being a human, I suppose. We have to create a process or a ritual for how we engage with our own energy.
I'm gonna say two things, because you sparked something in there for me. Number one is, for most men, you hear the phrases like, "Oh, I just lost it," right? So we're still talking about anger. "Oh, I lost it. I just blew up." Well, what did you lose?
Yes.
If you sit with it for a moment, what did you actually lose in that moment? The truth is that you lost consciousness. You lost the conscious capacity to respond, and you reacted unconsciously from your emotion. You actually became engulfed by the experience of your anger to such a degree that you can't consciously respond properly. And so I think that's a really important thing for us as men to understand, is that we need to learn how to work with these energies, because if we don't, we are communicating, responding, reacting completely unconsciously. And no man wants to operate from that place, because it removes our choice, right? And our choice is linked to our sense of sovereignty and our sense of freedom.
Yeah.
So what do? I started years and years ago, I started this practice of what I called the fire meditation, because my anger was and is very robust. It's very, I like it. I dislike it. It's frightening sometimes. It's also amazing. I have a very good relationship to it now. But before, I saw it as the villain in my story. I was the nice guy. I didn't like it. And so because, yeah.
Or what's known as a negative
yes.
emotion. And for me, this is a farce.
Right.
There are no negative emotions.
Well said.
Please continue.
And so it was overpowering, right? It was this big energy that would come up, and I was like, fuck, how do I deal with this? So I created something called the fire meditation, where I would intentionally, whenever I was angry or upset, and I would start to feel something that felt overwhelming, overpowering, or that I had labeled as that negative emotion, as you said, I would just go and sit and breathe and experience it. And I would slowly start to build a sense of tolerance to it. The challenge that most of us men have is that we have very low tolerance to the emotions that we dislike within ourselves. And it's almost always correlated to somebody else's inability, incapacity to deal with an emotion that was then dangerous to us as a small child, right? So again, for me, tying it back to my story, anger was abusive when I was a boy, right? It meant that things were probably going to escalate to something maybe physically violent or verbally or emotionally abusive. And so I saw it as a negative emotion. And so I had to learn how to sit in the heat and the fire of my own experience of that energy and build up a little bit of tolerance to it so that when it comes up now, I'm not afraid of it. I'm not scared of it. I don't have to shut it down. I also don't have to react from it. I can be with it and be conscious to it while still engaging in a conversation, whether that's setting a boundary with my wife or whether that's protecting my family, which I've had to do on a number of occasions here in Manhattan from people who are, unwell and threatening. And so learning how to build tolerance to that energy is very, very important. And that can be our anxiety, our grief, our anger, our shame, whatever it is. Learning to build tolerance to it is incredibly important. And then learning how to befriend it, right? There's a great poet named David White. David White says, anger is the deepest form of care. Anger is the deepest form of care for ourselves, for another, for what matters, for our purpose, for our lives, etc. And we as men don't often see it like that, but it fundamentally is. And so we have to learn how to build tolerance to that energy.
Yes. We have to learn to create a higher tolerance for discomfort. Life is not always going to be comfortable. I feel like we were sold a story of comfort, right? And so really what we're talking about here, and whatever the emotion is, sadness and grief, many men are avoiding that as well. And so it's really about increasing our capacity to hold discomfort and creating a practice, a ritual in that moment that works for you. And so like for me in a heightened argument with my beloved, I need 10 minutes. It's just what I need, Connor. I know myself well enough at this point. I need 10 minutes. I'm going to go over here. Don't worry about what I'm doing. It's most likely push-ups. No big deal, But but here's the important point. I'm coming back. And when I come back, I guarantee you safety. I guarantee you listening. And I guarantee you that I am going to work with my anger such that I can transmute it into decisive action. As men, anger is a motivating force for action. We are called to take action. And so I view my anger as like, whoa, like, and it could be whatever. It could be in your financial, your physical, your emotional body. It could be in your, it could be on any of these pillars. We need to take action on something. That anger creeps right up. You know what I'm saying? And so like, it's important to take note and say like, what is this trying to inform me to take action on? Whatever that is. And so here we are, like you have your tools for working with it. Breath of fire. I got some Lionheart push-ups, like finding these tools as simple or as silly sometimes as it may need to be. Men, it's time. It's time to take ownership for your actions, for how you show up.
I agree, man. Well, I think just to touch on that, we experience the world through our nervous system, And we forget that sometimes. We think that we experience the world through our thoughts, and we don't. And we're much bigger than that. And so, we have to be able to, and a small example of this is, I do this at every retreat, at every men's weekend that I lead. I say, do you know how your erection works? And most guys will respond with, well, I get horny, I get turned on, and then blood flows into my penis. I say, yes, partially. But what's actually happening is that there's two parts to your nervous system that are incredibly important, the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic. The sympathetic is the gas pedal. That's what allows you to get shit done, get your task list done, send your emails to your push-ups, all those types of things. And the parasympathetic is your rest and digest. It's your calm part of your nervous system. And one of the things that's really interesting about our arousal body is that in order to get aroused and get a hard on, you actually have to be more parasympathetic dominant. So you actually have to be more in a relaxed state than in a stressed state, than in a go state. And the challenge that a lot of men face sexually or relationally is that they don't know how to slow. They actually don't know how to turn the dial down on the intensity of the energy that they're experiencing in their body. So they're
Right.
constantly stressed. They're constantly angry or anxious, and they don't know how to move out of that state. And so learning how to regulate your nervous system and move out of this get shit done oriented state, which is very good during the day. I'm in that state during the day a lot where I'm managing my business and running things and managing my team. And, I'm in that state quite a bit. But if I was in that state all the time, it wouldn't be conducive for my family, for my son, for my relationship to my wife, for my sex life. It wouldn't be conducive for those things. So knowing how to work with this energy to regulate the body and regulate the nervous system and actually what's called down regulate from that stressed out, over anxious state down into a calm rest and digest state where we are grounded, where we are present, is actually much more conducive for communication, for connection, for love and intimacy, but also for sexual arousal and connection. So I'm speaking to the benefits here because I feel like, 20-year-old me would have probably listened to this conversation like, I don't know about
Yes.
this until I got to that part. So I'm just sort of putting it out there, right? Because the more, and I'll just say one more thing about this because I feel like this is important. The more that we're in that sympathetic nervous system response, um, sexually, that's where climax happens. That's where we lose an erection. That's where we lose our connection to the other person. So the more stressed we are, the more anxious we are, and the more that we're in that sympathetic nervous system response, the more challenging it is. And this is where performance anxiety comes from, overthinking comes from. This is where, a lot of non-medical erectile dysfunction and premature ejaculation comes from. It's simply that our bodies are in this constant stress state and we can't move out of it into a more restful state, which is much more conducive for love and intimacy and sexual connection and communication. And so this is essential for any man, like what you and I are talking about today, and the work that your organization does and mine does is essential for any man who's wanting to learn how to be more grounded, more present, more calm. And the byproduct of that is that he's going to be more potent in these areas of his life. He's going to be more potent sexually in his communication, in his relationship, in his purpose, because he won't be so wound up and constantly operating from this place of having the gas pedal, floored and the RPM of his mind and his body jacked up throughout the entire day. That's very hard to operate from that place for a very long period of time.
Yeah. Yeah. And we see it in the modern archetypes of men who are overworked, overstressed, not present at home. And we wonder why are all these ailments showing up? It's like, man, it's all that shit that's stuffed down. So the other thing I know about you, and I want to shift into this last piece here. Last time we chatted, you were a brand new father.
I do. Yeah.
I believe you have a son. Is that correct?
Yeah, I have a son.
Yeah. And so what a blessing to have this men's work in your life before becoming a father. But also how has becoming a father in this experience, informed you on the challenges that fathers face, specific to fatherhood and being a husband. What kind of things are, I almost imagine you're halfway into your fatherhood book.
Oh man, I'm on. Oh,
because there's so many lessons,
right?
That come along with it.
That, it's a huge, especially having a son in today's world.
Chapter 1, drinking from the fire hose of fatherhood.
Yeah, and the subtitle is poopy diapers and puking on floors. Look, being a dad in today's world, I think is very interesting when there are narratives that, men are not wanted and not needed in parenting, that the masculine is toxic and unsafe. And, it's a very interesting landscape. And so I don't want to get into that too much, but for me, it's been incredibly healing, joyous, awe-inspiring, but also deeply confronting, deeply confronting the fear of,
Yes.
fear of what would I do if my son had this happen to him or this conversation. My wife and I have talked about how do we talk to him about porn and drugs and weed and, some of these things that are out there. And it's like, poof, I mean, those are big things, because the influence that you have over your child and over over your son is very real. And I go back to this quote that Nietzsche had, which is what was hidden in the father, the secrets of the father will be revealed in the son. And I'm very conscious of that because I think for many men, they're
Ooh.
living out the secrets of their fathers. And I know I did to some degree, the secret of their anger or their unhappiness, their lack of willingness to be vibrant and pursue what they ultimately wanted in life. And so I'm very conscious and I bear the weight daily of I know my son is going to look to me to as a model of some form of masculinity and what it means to be a man. And that is a very real weight that I take seriously. It's also a huge sense of pride and joy and wonder, but it's also a very deep
Yeah.
responsibility that I take seriously and I grapple with daily. And and so I'm learning a tremendous amount from my boy, and I think one of the things that I've just prioritized with him is teaching him what regulation looks like, what it's like to live in the body, and so when he's upset, I'll pick him up and I'll hold him. I started this practice where I started this practice very young with him, where he would start to cry or be emotional, and I'd just pick him up and I would fold him, and I would just take a nice deep breath in and then exhale out the mouth. And I would regulate my own nervous system while holding him. And eventually he would calm down. And I've started to practice this by saying, inhale and exhale. And what I've noticed over the months of me doing this is that he has actually started to learn how to be more in that body of his and actually learn how to regulate. And it's very soothing for him. And so I hope and pray to some degree that that's a gift that I can impart onto him, is the importance of living from that space, living from our experience and prioritizing regulating ourselves to some capacity, and trusting our bodies as much as we trust our minds
Yeah.
as men. But it's a big one, man. I mean, that's it's a huge conversation,
Yeah.
and I think I've learned a lot about who I am and what I fear and what I worry about by seeing my son and taking seriously the notion that I just
Mm.
like I deeply want the best for him and in a way that is so powerful that I hadn't really experienced that before. And so it's given me a very different context from my own parents, my own family systems, and the healing that we can do as men. Um, so it's potent. Have you experienced the same thing as you become a father? You're more down the road than I am.
Yeah. And I have three sons, and there's definitely this inherent wanting to protect their innocence, to protect them physically, and also in pain, because my boys are wild and they fall down and get scratched up and banged up all the time. And there's also a part of me that wants to make space for their wildness, to make space for their full expression. My son Noah, he loves to dress up, and he dresses up fucking cool. So it's like I want to preserve and protect him, to allow him to be in his full expression. And so it's all of it. I'm also in the diaper phase and getting thrown up on, and it's so humbling. And no matter how much work you think you've done, it's not until you're up in the middle of the night on low sleep and you've been spit up on or whatever, and you just go like, yeah, I'm just a normal, regular ass human being. There's no experience in life that can like prepare you for the depth of humility that you
Oh,
have to become a parent. And then so here's the other part that I would offer is that I have to be a willing to let go and to know that like the uncles are going to raise my boys too. To know that his friendships and the environments that he's in are also going to inform him, and to let him know no matter what happens, you can always come back to me. For me, this is what matters, because I know you have to go out to experience. I had to do it myself. We have to do that as men. The coddling, this like conscious parenting a lot of times turns into like what do they call it? Helicopter parenting and coddling. There's another level of conscious parenting that is letting go. And that's very important to like come to terms with. And in that letting go, can we, in our lives and in our nuclear families, can we create any sense of village for these young men and women, for these boys and girls who are coming into the world? Because that's really what's needed is village. No two parents can do it alone. I am certain of it. I'm absolutely certain of it. We're trying, and we need village. The mothers need it. And you know, you and your wife are both kind of professionals and have careers and things like this. But are you feeling a longing for village in your situation?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we moved to where we are right now to be closer to nature, but also to be closer to some friends. And
Yes.
One of the things that I've been talking about with my personal men's group is, you know, how do we get closer to one another in the next 2 to 3 years, and prioritizing that, because a lot of us have young kids.
Yes.
And I agree. I think not only
Right.
does
And this is the time.
yeah, that's it. And I think not only do young kids need a village to be raised in, but I think relationships and marriages also need that village to be raised in, to be healthy. And so we've definitely been talking about how do we bring ourselves closer to the people that we love and want to be around to raise our children, but also to raise ourselves in. And I think that's a really important context. And the last thing I'll say is, you know, I watch my boy sometimes, and he's a firecracker, right? His name is Code, CODE, is Code, and I call him Code Dragon, and I'm Dad
Oh, wow.
Dragon, right? So every morning I go,
Code.
Code Dragon, Dad Dragon, raw. You know, it's a lot of fun. But I watch my boy, and he has such a vibrancy and purity and innocence for the world, but he also has this spark that is wild. You know, like I watch him last night, he was running around the kitchen just doing laps, you know, just running around and grabbing things and throwing them, and, you know, he can open doors, right? So he can open the door to the outside and open the door to downstairs. And so it's this constant balance of, you know, keeping him alive. I usually joke that like parenting is part loving and part like death prevention, you know, like just stopping them from throwing themselves down freaking stairs.
Yeah.
But I just watch in awe and wonder of like how much energy this young boy has. And I'm always reminded of like, oh, that was me. That is me. You know, I still am that man that has this tremendous potency that can feel wild. And partly it needs to have a space to be wild and to go wild, and it also needs a space to be directed. So that's probably what I would just say to close the loop on that.
Beautiful. Men's work is out. It's time to get the book, men. If you haven't been into a men's circle, a space of masculine alchemy, pick up the book. Connor Beaton, it's always good to drop in with you. Is there anything that you would like to leave with the brothers and sisters who are listening?
I think that's it, man. If you, wherever you are on your journey, I hope that you pick up a copy of Men's Work and to man it forward, man it forward to somebody that you know could use that support or use that insight or use that guidance. And as always, reach out and let me know if you enjoyed it, what you liked, what you disliked. I'm always open to hearing feedback on it. So that's it. Thank you.
Cool. We'll be passing the book around Sacred Sun circles. Like I said, we are in this age of information, and it's good to hear it from all sides. So thank you for having the confidence and courage to share your perspective and your journey with others, because it's meaningful, it's important, and this is the way we shift culture, by coming out, by leading, by having our shadows out front, and by no longer hiding. And so I see you as someone who's out front leading the charge. With that, Sacred Sons, Adam Jackson, Connor Beaton, Men's Work, and ManTalks. Get into it. We're out, family. Peace.